So, board members and audience, this is simply a finance report that I've been doing annually since 2015, I believe. I produce an executive summary, and we do have some extra copies of those here. And what we do is we take the historical data for Seabrook over a measured period, which starts in 2014. And it's a little easy for me as I do it now because I'm simply taking last year's report and adding the 2022 numbers. Some of them I consider to be key numbers. And so that report, the bigger report, and the summary goes to the board. We'll give it to the budget committee when they start to do their work. And I think that hopefully it's a useful tool, but it's really up to the policymakers to use it as they see fit. I prepared this myself, so some of the lettering may be a little small, but I'll read so that everybody can see. So as I said, it's produced annually. Some terms for us. The total levy is the total amount of tax dollars raised by the town of Seabrook. So that would be everything that has to be taxed for. That's the total tax levy. And the total levy, obviously, is how you judge the relative tax burden year to year. So if in 2021 you needed to raise 40 million, and in 2021 you needed to raise 41 million, regardless of individual status in terms of value, overall the taxpayers would be paying an additional $1 million in tax. That's spread out amongst all taxpayers and all categories of taxpayers. So that's what we mean by judging the relative burden, and that's how you do it. And how do you get to the total levy? So the total levy is arrived at by your budget, plus your warrant articles, less your local revenues, and though I didn't put it on the slide, sometimes application of fund balance by the Board of Selectmen, which could reduce the amount of levy needed. What are local revenues? So local revenues are user fees, water and sewer charges, which come off the levy, clerk fees, anything where you're paying an additional fee to the town of Seabrook for a service. And naturally, as I said, for every dollar that you raise in local revenue, that's one less dollar in property taxation than you need. So let's take a look at 2022, and let's look at the levy number, which I know that's very light, but I'll read it as $45,476,936. So that's the 2022 levy, and that's why you got the tax bills that you got, because we have to fund that levy number. And so your tax bills are driven by that number. So this is over a 6% increase over the 2021 levy number of $42,627,278. And quite frankly, that's a large levy increase for the town of Seabrook. I'm sorry?
Shut the lights, Bill.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think we can do that, Chief.
Thank you.
All right, Chief, that's much better. All right, yes. You know, I knew the Chief came to this meeting for a reason.
Mr. Manzi, sorry
Yeah.
to interrupt, but can you mention that 42 million also included the school system?
Yeah, so all when I refer to the total levy, that is both the town and the school system combined. So it's not just the town. So, as I said, that's a 6.6% increase in the levy. Over the course of the measured time frame here, which is now 9 years, the tax levy has gone up on average 2.5%, notwithstanding that large increase in 2022. So that means when you take a look at your levy in Seabrook, it's gone up 2.5% annually, which is an astounding number. It's a great number for taxpayers. So as I said, this is a large levy increase in '22, and we want to understand why did we have such a big levy increase in 2022. So, over the course of my prior reports, we've always highlighted the fact that Nextera, Seabrook Station, our biggest taxpayer, has been on a course to pay less and less as a percentage of the total levy since 2014. But in 2022, there was a big change in the status of, God bless you, Seabrook Station and Nextera. For 2022, what I've referred to as the Nextera shift, which again is that shift from Nextera to residential taxpayers, was reversed. So 2022 saw a reversal of that trend. In 2022, residential taxpayers as a class received approximately a 2% property tax cut. So in the aggregate, residential taxpayers received a 2% tax cut. So notwithstanding the levy increase, residential still got a tax cut. So, how did the residences get a tax cut in 2022? Let's look at the trend lines before 2022. And this is what this table is meant to show. In 2014, Nextera paid 42% of the overall levy, and residential taxpayers paid 38.8% of the levy. To show you how important Nextera is to our overall financial health, in 2014, Nextera, one taxpayer, paid more in tax dollars than the entire residential class of taxpayer. So in 2014, Nextera paid approximately $1 million more than every other residential taxpayer in Seabrook. That's an astounding figure. In 2021, you see the reversal. Nextera goes from 42% of the total levy to 28% of the total levy. Residences go from 38% of the total levy to 51% of the total levy, a shift. So leaving aside all other issues, including spending, because of this Nextera shift, residences have paid a larger portion of that levy. And that is unmistakable, and I've called it the Nextera shift. The biggest real factor in, not the only factor, but the biggest factor in why in that period, with a levy increase of only 2.5% a year, some residences saw pretty good tax increases because we were making adjustments for the fact that Nextera was going down and everybody else was going up.
Mr. Manzi, just a point of clarification. The town budget compared to 2014 to 2021 also saw an increase.
Yes.
Whereas the actual dollars paid by Nextera stayed somewhere between $11.5 and $12.5 million.
Yeah.
Right? So the dollars paid by Nextera has been somewhat flat, granted a little up, little down, $500,000 here and there, but the town budget has had a monotonic increase, and as a result, the steady amount has been going down as a percentage.
So, no, because this number is not measuring the budget. It's measuring what comes after the budget, which
Correct.
is,
Even if you take tax levy,
it's the levy. So the levy, though, is subsidized, the levy could be subsidized by fund balance, which in this measured period, fund balance applied is over 10 million.
true, but fund balance is also tax dollars.
Right, but it's applied and given back. So when it's given back, it's no longer tax dollars, it goes back to the taxpayers.
So would it be fair to say that the tax levy in 2014 to 2021 has gone up?
2.5% a year,
Yeah, it has gone up 2.5% a year.
yeah?
Whereas the next era contribution has been, in terms of dollar numbers, has remained about flat. And so the percentage contribution of next era has been going down.
So Nextera, I'd have to look at the 2014 number, and I'm able to do that right now. But 2014 may have been a year where they paid as much as 15 million in property tax. So Nextera didn't just stay flat. Nextera went from 15 million down to 12 million due to a disagreement on assessment. So at the end of the day, they did go down. So our biggest taxpayer went down substantially.
Yeah, you look
Then they stayed flat.
Yeah, so it'll be key to know whether that happened in 2014 or 2013.
Yeah.
But I think that over the last 6 years, I think that they have been about flat, 11.5 to 12.5 in that range, whereas the tax levies have gone up. So as a percentage, the next era contribution has been going down.
So the next era is going down, but again, as you look at those percentages, in 2014, they paid more than the entire residential class. So now as that shifts, even with nothing else, residences have to pick up more because it's not going to commercial industrial. Their dollars paid stayed flat. So the truth of the matter is that Nextera is the elephant in the room. And as burden shifts from Nextera, it has to go to either commercial industrial or residential, and the trend lines are clear. It went from 38% of levy in 2014 to 51% of levy. That is astounding, and that's something that everybody anticipated would happen over time, but that number can't be short-shrifted, or it's a shift. It's a shift from our biggest taxpayer, a taxpayer that paid more than the entire aggregate of residential in 14, and I'll give you that number in a second, but that shift means that residences have to pay more, even if you don't spend more money. So, in 2022, what happened? Nextera went from that 28.8%, and they had been on an annual decline. They went all the way up 5.7 points about to 33.7% of the levy. That means we reversed the trend for that 1 year. They paid from 12 million in 21, they paid 15.3 million in 22. Residential taxpayers went from over 50% of the total levy down to 47%. So, look at it in reverse. If you think or would like to make the case that Nextera isn't the elephant in the room, this number shows you that it is. Because when they pay a proper value and they go up, like everybody else goes up, look what happened. Residences got a 2% tax cut in 22, and it's essentially because Nextera was adjusted. Correctly, we hope.
Shouldn't there be a column for commercial, which has increased tremendously since 2014?
So in the main report, we give all the numbers, including commercial industrial. And commercial industrial as a class, when you take out Nextera and don't count them as commercial industrial, to me, they're their own segment. It really hasn't gone up in terms of percentage. So the dollars are important to us. and they most certainly are important, but they've stayed somewhat flat, and there were reasons for that, and we can go into those, but commercial industrial has not been a growth number in terms of the percentage of the levy. So, and I'll give you some of those numbers. I wasn't hooked to the internet, so, but I am now, and I'll pull those numbers up. So, here's just a graph that shows, as you see, starting in 2014, the blue is Nextera, and you can see in 2014, Nextera is above residential. And then you see what happens over the course of the measured period. In 2022, you start to see the lines bend in what we consider to be the right way. So for residential, the green line, that's down. For Nextera, the blue line, that's up. And that's where we would like to see it continue to go. So, as we just talked about, 42% in 2014. The residential share was about 39%. Nextera rose 5% as a percentage of the total levy, stopping the Nextera shift. Residential taxpayers benefited from this change. So what happened in the 2022 budget? The municipal budget increased by 9% in 2022. What were the drivers of that budgetary increase?
Mr. Manzi, just one comment for clarification.
Yep.
Municipal budget is the portion of the total budget less the school and the county tax, right?
So in this case, I'm simply taking, when I reference that, I think that would be right. I'm just saying it would be the municipal budget change, Ravi, year to year, without regard to anything else. So that's not as a percentage of levy, that's simply, it went up 9% year to year. So what were the drivers of that? And as in 2021, the main drivers were the public safety budgets, police and fire. Was 2022 different? In reality, it wasn't. So for our budget in 2022, we show you the blue, in this case, is police, the green is fire, that big bar is the total, and then the combined public safety is the last one on the right. Bottom line is that your municipal budget, in terms of the aggregate increase, public safety made up 77% of the increase. Now, relative to the split between police and fire, in 2022, fire has the higher of the two in terms of contribution to growth. In 2021, that was reversed. Police looked like fire does in 2022. So in 2021, that police number was higher than the fire number. Bottom line is that in 21, I believe that the number was approximately 85% of the total increase in the budget was driven by public safety.
Just,
Yep.
with that chart, one more comment there. So if, based on the way the 2023 budgets are being built, the same chart would have similar trend, meaning the fire will be higher than the police
So-
for 2023.
So, because I was struggling with cold and what have you over the weekend, I did a rough calculation on 23 without breaking it out between departments. So I wanted to know what that number was in the aggregate, Ravi, for 23. It drops to 50%. So of the total increase in the 2023 budget, 50% would be attributable to public safety by my sort of scratch math. But I didn't put it up here because it was scratch math and I was doing it fast. But I'm pretty confident that the number would be approximately 50%. So if that's accurate, and I believe it is, it would have gone from 85% to 77% to 50% in '23. Means other budgets which have been squeezed
Catching up.
are trying to catch up a little bit, yes. So, where do our tax dollars go? In 2022, with the increase in funds from NextEra, despite the fact that residential went down, those funds have driven the town portion up slightly from last year, which was about 45%. I would say to you that the counties remain somewhat constant, and the schools in the town have flipped places. So the town now constitutes approximately 48.8% of the total levies, the school 45.6.
It was 48 and 46 the year before.
That's correct. So it's simply reversed. And that's from the infusion of the additional money from NextEra. And so there I say the additional NextEra dollars have pushed the town percentage up. Where do our tax dollars come from? And this goes to the question that got raised earlier. In 2022, NextEra is a category 33.7. Other utilities, so they're taxed a little bit differently than commercial industrial. Other utilities 4.6. Commercial industrial, a very important number, but 14.4. And as we've discussed, a residential number at 47.3% for 2022. And of course, this reverses the trend from 2021. But one of the numbers that I've started to include in the report is simply residential versus all other business, whether it be utility, commercial, industrial, or NextEra. In 2020, business was more than 50% of your tax levy. That's good. A lot of communities would really, really salivate for that. In 2021, there was slippage, and residential, for the first time since we've been measuring, went up over 50% of the total levy. Business down to 48. But again, with the changes in NextEra, in 2022, business has gone back to the 2020 number. They're now over 50% of your total levy. That's a good number, and everybody should be happy about that number. So, I traditionally provide, and I will, I hope at the March meeting, provide separate reports for our water and our sewer operations that measure what we output, what we take in for money, and how those numbers match up to our expenses. Water is, at least in '21, was self-sustaining operationally. So what that means is that the water rates that residents paid for the operations of the water department. There was a little surplus in 2021. Sewer operationally was not self-sufficient in 2021, and it's something that our independent auditors are highlighting, and something I know that the board has talked about, and I think that sometime in March we'll come back and look at that, hopefully in conjunction with the reports. In combination, there's still a taxpayer subsidy to water and sewer. When you add capital expenses, there is a major taxpayer subsidy to water and sewer. So what that means is that as we spend money, we were just talking about warrant articles. So as we spend money for capital on water or sewer, those are not funded by rates. They're funded by the tax rate. And consequently, if you manage to move those capital expenses off of the tax rate and onto the ratepayers, The ratepayers would like it less, the taxpayers would like it more. And that's really the truth. This is a repeat comment, and probably be in next year's too.
Can I make,
Yes, please.
this is an important point, as the town manager is saying, the water department is financially self-sufficient because the monies that they raise from the water bills are sufficient to operate the water department, but it is not the case with the sewer department. So there is a deficit which is filled in or subsidized by the taxpayers, and also all the capital expenses are paid by the taxpayers. The difficulty with that is that when you say it's paid by the taxpayers, that those expenses are peanut buttered across the entire tax base, okay? But when people are, when money is raised through the water and sewer bill, your bill is proportional to your usage. So the more you use, the more you pay. The less you use, the less you pay. But when it is in the tax, when it shows up on your tax bill, you don't have that. Everybody gets spread out based on the property value. So it is always better to have the capital budget for the water and sewer to be reflected in the bills rather than on the tax base, because that way people who use more of it will pay most of it. That's only that makes the system more equitable and fair.
So before I go on, because I did hook up to the internet, the year one of the measured period here, which as I mentioned is 2014. The question I raised by Ravi was NextEra constant, and they actually in 2014 and 2015 paid 15.6 million. So
And then it went down and flat from there.
then they went down. So the point that you made was correct, just not the years. So 2016 was the year of adjustment down to 12.8 million, but those first 2 years, 15.6 million, actually more than they're paying today. So in all those years, NextEra, in terms of aggregate dollars, is still paying less than they paid in 2014. There aren't too many taxpayers that are in the room that can say that they're paying less in total dollars than they paid in 2014. But NextEra can say that.
Mr. Manzi, when I made the presentation at the library, one question that came up was, what would happen next year with the NextEra? Would they still pay the elevated amount, or would they revert back to the near $12 million? So that question, so I wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, so let's talk about that issue a little bit, because indirectly I talk about it in the executive summary. So I made some editorial comments in the executive summary, and I'm going to go over a couple of those that aren't in the PowerPoint. But to your question, the town manager is going to say to you, Ravi, that it depends.
Yes.
Why did NextEra go up this year? So let's start with that. So NextEra went up this year, not because we arbitrarily said, well, we feel like raising them. They went up because with the energy markets in turmoil, the Ukraine war, other factors, the price of natural gas has gone way up. You folks in the audience are paying currently through your electric bills much higher rates. NextEra is an energy company. So before we set the assessment, and that's done by the Board of Selectmen, who sit as the assessors for the Town of Seabrook. So the selectmen have to look at a number of things. And I can tell you that even though it's confidential, NextEra is obligated to give the Board of Selectmen their financials. And let's just say that it is confidential, but I don't think it's any secret that as electricity goes up, natural gas goes up, they do better. Our methodology evaluation that the Board of Selectmen uses is that essentially the price of natural gas driving the price of electricity, helps us to determine, helps the board to determine what that assessment should be. And so the assessment went up to approximately 1.2 billion this year. We think it's sustainable. The Board of Selectmen made that judgment, and the judgment that the board made accrued to the benefit of our residential taxpayers especially, because, as I said, not too many communities get a tax cut. So the selectmen, I think, had a big job there, and they did it. So what happens next year? And that's the second part of the question. It depends on the energy markets. But as I point out in the executive summary, as a group, and I include the public in this, it's easy to come and, there's always gonna be gripes. Whether it be how a number was determined, whether it be Department A was overfunded and Department B was underfunded. What we need to do is more longer-term planning, relative to the next era number, plan for the worst, hope for the best. And that's something that all of us can do together. So, as we have budget committee meetings, budgets, I'm fond of saying budgets are a statement of community value. And so, as you look at budgets, they sort of reflect the values you have as a community. So what should we fund? What should we fund less of? What should we fund more of? Should there be a cap on what we agree to fund? In other words, should the selectmen say, as we develop the budget, limit the aggregate increase to 2%, come hell or high water? And now you know what your number's gonna be, but that means that you have to make difficult decisions. Somebody gets funded, somebody doesn't. And that's where budgeting, it's easy to criticize after the fact. But if you're part of the team that helps develop the budget, then we all in that budget together, and I think we all have a better chance of seeing a budget passed at town meeting that we've all invested in. And we don't really want a default budget because there's no planning that goes into that. There's no statement of values in a default budget. What's in a regular budget, if we have community buy-in, is where we want to drive the community. And that's essentially the editorial comment, which, the board may choose to listen to or throw in the garbage, but I've said it. The challenges, if you want to reduce budget, if that's the goal, set budgetary parameters. Rely on the main budget, not the default budget. Tough choices ahead. Spend more time during the year on the CIP. CIP plan we produce, and we produced a new one in the past cycle, has how we pay for it or how we would propose to pay for it. So if we spend time on that, we can plan our capital future better with more buy-in and more understanding of why these warrant articles are there. And, it's not easy, but the more community participation and buy-in that we have, the better off everybody is.
Mr. Manzi, just
Yes.
may I make one comment here?
Yeah?
The board, by and large, supported the requested budgets to the point of like 6.7% increase
Yes.
to the budget for 2023. However, the default budget, which what the town has to revert to, if you, the town voters, were to vote down the proposed budget, has to be built in a certain way, and that's based on a statute. And, we have had differences, we have had those discussions, it's all on videotape, anybody can go look at the archives. But the important thing about the default value, and not that, you can't ignore it, because if the proposed budget gets voted down, then the default budget is going to come into action, And the people, when you guys vote, must have a true choice between the two, and so the default budget is also important. You can't just ignore it, it's also important.
So I don't disagree with the fact that it's important, and there's certainly disagreements, but the editorial comment is that it's the voter's choice, as you
Yes,
point out. It's the
absolutely.
voter's choice. But if we develop a budget with participation from the public earlier and longer, then we won't have to rely on the default budget. And I can say editorially that reliance on the default budget is just substandard, subpar. It may be what the voters choose, but it's developing a budget with the selectmen, with the budget committee, and hopefully with the public, is where your values are, where your choices get made. And so it's a better document, because there's been planning that's gone. The default budget doesn't have any planning. It's just a number you pull out of last year. Maybe some disagreement on what that number is. But it's important, but it's not the right way to go for the town of Seabrook. It's not.
But we have to be absolutely clear. We give the people the choice, and if people choose to vote for the 6.7% increase in proposed budget, they have the right to do it. But if they choose not to do that, they have the right to do that, but they should be given the choice, and that's important.
It's their choice, but what I'm saying is you develop a budget, more time ought to be spent on it, and we ought to develop a budget that has some public support and some public input. And so, rather than coming after the budget is developed and saying, boy, you guys did a terrible job, come in and help us develop the budget and develop it earlier and participate in that.
Yeah,
And then
I think-
later on, we can all say, well, maybe all of us did a terrible job. But there's public participation is good, it's better, and it gets community buy-in. And so earlier participation is all I'm advocating. Not to say that you shouldn't choose a default budget if that's what you want to do, but the planning goes into the regular budget, not the default. Let me just close this out. Value judgments, close the water and sewer subsidy, spend more time during the year. Board direction on the budget, parameters, set capital parameters. We'll get that CIP book out and start this process all over again about 30 days after town meeting. And we're gonna be back with the selectmen, fighting it out about the capital book. So, thank you, and that's all I have, and yes, we can